Hannum, the chair of the Qualifications Training and Licensing Subcommittee for today's meeting. I am declaring that we do have a quorum present for our meeting today, and apologies to anyone attending for the late start. The purpose of this meeting is to act on important business related to the practice of natural medicine in the state of Colorado. The board will make its decisions on agenda items today based upon written materials provided for its consideration in advance of this meeting. The public is welcome to listen. The public should not address the board unless requested by the board. As a friendly reminder to board members, please note that some of the material contained in the agenda packet may be deemed confidential. In addition, the board should not discuss legal advice previously received or seek legal guidance in an open session. Such matters will be moved into executive session for discussion. Members of the public will be asked to leave the meeting during the executive session. After an executive session, the board will vote on agenda items discussed in the executive session. Before we get into roll call, I'd like for participants who are able to please adjust their name on Zoom to indicate You can do this by clicking on the three dots while hovering your mouse over your image. So we'll start with roll call. So I, Dr. Lisa Hannum, I'm present. I believe Lundy will be absent. I believe Dr. Clarissa Pincola Estes is also absent. Dr. Sue Sisley.
President.
Thank you for being here, Dr. Sisley. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Dr. Sophia Chavez. Dr. Chavez?
She's on. I wonder if she's having a cell computer issue.
Yeah, I see her on as well. Dr. Stacy Lux, I believe, is absent. Skippy Upton-Mesereau.
Present with some technical issues that I am still working through.
Thank you so much for being here. And Dr. Brad Connor.
I'm here. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And then we have our DOR designee, Dominique Mendiola. Not sure if Dominique is with us today. A few housekeeping items as we get started. I'd like to ask everyone to turn their cell phones to silent. Thank you. And now I'd like to hand it over to Lori Bratton, our Program Director for Internet.
Thank you. My name is Lori Bratton. I'm the Program Director, and my pronouns are she, her. Today, we have a variety of staff with us. We have Amanda Weirs, who is the Centralized Services Manager. Thanks, Amanda, for being here. We also have someone who is helping us with our minutes, Jana Contreras. She works in the division. We have Jessica Fisher. She is our new policy analyst and has just joined the team, and she will be helping us with the roles. We also have Kathy Duran, who has been helping with the team. She works in the as program manager. Thanks, Kathy. And we, of course, have Sam Rami, our senior advisor here. Thanks, Sam, for being here. We also have to introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you. I'm Ashley Mueller from the Attorney General's office. My team represent the board and the division. I do want to just touch back and check in to make sure that Dr. Chavez is in fact with us. I know she's in the call, but I just need to make sure that for quorum.
My sound is going in and out, so
Perfect.
sorry.
Perfect. As long as we can confirm you're here. Thanks so much.
And we also have Allison Robinette with DOR with us. I think she's representing the DOR today in South. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, staff. Appreciate it. We're going to move into approving the minutes from our last meeting on December 21st, 2023. So if we briefly review those minutes together, and if there's no discussion, I'll ask for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank you, Sleep.
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Connor. I appreciate that. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion passes. So now let's move to the program director report.
Thanks, Ken. I'm Dr. Hannum. I just wanted to say that we're coming to the very end, as of tomorrow, of our first paragraph of the consolidated recommendations. Everyone has spent so many months prior to even my arrival working with Sam, preparing these recommendations as their first submission. I want y'all to know that I am extremely impressed, and I think the work is phenomenal. You've done an amazing job, and I'm very proud of this process, of all of the material that you have been presenting to us to be able to move forward and make rules and for DOR. I also want to say that in the coming months, we're going to move into a different phase, and that will be rulemaking based on these consolidated recommendations that you have submitted. We will be asking for your feedback, and we will continue to work on revisions and discuss many more things in the coming months and years for the program, and we will just continue to meet and work through. But this first round of recommendations, we'll be just working on creating rules, specifically in licensing and education first. So this subcommittee's work is extremely important because it's where we start in our process for rulemaking, so that we can meet the statutory deadline to have the applications available by the end of the year. So again, I thank everyone for their time and effort, and please be in attendance tomorrow for the full board meeting so that the entire packet of consolidated recommendations can be approved as a whole. I think that's everything. So Sam, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you summed it up well. I think we've had, somewhere close to 70 meetings from beginning April 13th to now, and if you guys are familiar with boards, that might be other boards' number of meetings over like several years. So I just want to thank the non-voting participants and the board members for this process. We wouldn't have been in this place for these consolidated recommendations without your work and your attendance, and for the people joining us on the public attendee list. And I just want to thank them for their attendance as well, and feedback in these discussions. And the work doesn't end here, and because we're closing up this phase of these initial recommendations, we will be looking to our non-voting participants as well as our public attendees to join us at the meetings we will hold on the drafted rules from the recommendations. And like Lori said, with these initial recommendations, there's going to be revisions and written and public feedback, comment at these meetings in the next few months, and then as well in making. So there's a lot of work ahead, but I think we're in a really strong place because of your work and your service to attending all the subcommittee meetings and board meetings that we've had, and we're going to look to you as we get into this next space. So we'll have more information on participation and future meetings after this month, but we'll get through this week, and we'll get ready for our next phase and keep you all posted.
All right, thank you both. So with that, we'll move into introduction of non-voting subcommittee participants. So I'll just ask you to introduce yourselves, the organizations you're affiliated with, indicate your pronouns, And if you're able to change those settings in Zoom to indicate the pronouns, that's very helpful. So I don't believe Hadass Alterman is with us today. Dr. Jamie Beachy.
Hello, greetings everyone. I'm Jamie Beachy. My affiliations are with the Emory Center for Psychedelics and Spirituality, and I'm also the chair of the board of directors for the Chakra Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines. My background is as a MDMA therapist and training consultant, and also healthcare chaplain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beachy. James Etchelman.
Hello, everyone. My name is James Etchelman. Pronouns are he, him. I'm the founder of the Center of All Directions, and I have experience in the past as a guide.
Thank you, Mr. Etchelman. Luke Prieto.
Hi, I'm Luke Priel. I'm a care facilitator, experience working with people with PTSD. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. I don't believe Sarah Gale is with us this morning. Dr. Will Vanderveer.
Good morning, everyone. I'm a psychiatrist by training. I got involved in MDMA-assisted therapy research about 10 years ago. So I've been an MDMA therapist. I've also have a ketamine-assisted therapy clinic in Boulder, but mainly my work now is running a psychedelic-assisted therapy training for licensed clinicians called Integrative Psychiatry Institute.
Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Vanderveer. I don't believe Dr. Shannon Hughes is with us this morning. Dr. Matthew Kester.
Hi, good morning. I'm Matthew Kester. I'm a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine and have had a private practice that includes facilitation for about the last 10 years. And I also own Science Education and instruct for the National Certification Commission for Acupuncture and Boreal Medicine. Just nice to see you this morning, and yeah, look forward to the meeting.
Hey, thank you so much for being here, Dr. Kester. Jimmy Wayne.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jimmy Wayne, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm here in Denver, Colorado. I'm a legacy facilitator and also one of the co-founders of Psychedelic Passage, which is a concierge matchmaking service that helps connect folks to vetted facilitators. So grateful to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Dr. Anita Kumar.
Hi, I think my video was stopped, but if you can hear me, we're good. My name is Anita Kumar. I'm a psychiatrist, and I've been in practice for 25 years now. Here's my video. I'm currently an interventional psychiatrist in transcranial magnetic stimulation and ketamine at Denver Wellness Associates, and hopefully anticipating the release of MDMA soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Ian Sieb.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ian Sieb. I'm the governor's special advisor on cannabis. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Sieb. And Allison Robinette.
Good morning, board. As Lori introduced, my name is Alice Robinette. I use pronouns she, her, and I serve as Director of Policy Regulatory Affairs for the Department of Revenue's Natural Medicine Division.
Director Bratton, did you have a comment or question?
Yes, Dr. Madam Chair. I think that we did not do a delegation for signature of the minutes, and also wanted to make sure that we allowed our Attorney General to provide a report. I know that she's had a lot of important updates for us recently.
I'm so sorry to have missed those things. Can we do the delegation of signature first? So I'm going to call for a motion to delegate signature authority to Director Lori Bratton to sign the minutes from our meeting on December 21st of 2023.
I make that, and I'll second it.
Thank you. Dr. Connor, and I believe it was Gibby. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Aye. All right, motion carries. Thank you so much. And then I'd like to invite Assistant Attorney General Ashley Moeller.
Thanks, Dr. Hannum. As Ms. Bratton alluded, I was going to talk about kind of what the process might look like. You'll hear me say that again tomorrow, but she actually covered it really well. So I will leave it at that and let you guys get back to the important business of this subcommittee.
Thank you, Ms. Muller. We welcome any comments or any things that come up as we're speaking. Thank you so much. And again, I'm sorry to miss those any agenda items. Okay, so just a little preamble. Just want to make sure everything is kind of clear for the agenda today. We do have a big task today, which is approval by this subcommittee of our recommendations to go to the full board meeting tomorrow. I just want to say that, again, just to reemphasize what Director Bratton and Sam Barami let us know, is that this is a first draft. We're sending these recommendations to the full board. If those recommendations are approved by the full board tomorrow, they then will be taken to DORA and DOR and DOR and crafted and edited. There will be a public comment availability, and then we might see these again and be asked for changes and modifications. So this is not the last stab at these. We're going to start by reviewing updates from our last meeting in those consolidated recommendations. I'll just be really transparent. There were quite a few updates, so we'll kind of move through those and ask for any discussion about those updates first. And then our goal is to have a vote to approve these recommendations for the full board for the meeting tomorrow. So, we're going to start. We have a list of kind of the major updates, and I'm hoping, Amanda has those up for us today. The updates in this document are in red, so if you can scroll down a little bit, Amanda. So the first updates have to do with the length of licensure. This was based on the recommendation for continuing education. So the recommendation for continuing education is fairly high. So I'm making the recommendation that licensure happen for facilitators every 2 years instead of every 1 year to accommodate time to do that continuing education. That's consistent with other licenses in DORA, but with a lot of feedback about that if folks have thoughts about that. The second change has to do with the addition of that distinguished educator license. Want to thank Dr. Hughes. I know she's not here, and because she did provide some thoughts about what that would look like if you scroll down a little bit, Amanda. So most of that was crafted from thoughts that she added. I will note that this license would need to be renewed annually in this recommendation, the way it's written here, and that's consistent with the similar license on the medical board. That license is also required to be renewed annually, and so that's why that's in there. But most of these recommendations come from our discussion, from the Indigenous and Religious Use Subcommittee, and also was submitted by Dr. Hughes, and that was in our packet if you saw that. So this license would require affiliation with a training program, submission of a CV or resume, a 500-word biographical statement, and then attestations that could include different things: personal narratives, client references, or professional references. I did add in requirement for BLS certification, which is consistent with other licenses. Yeah, Skippy, I'd love feedback.
This was great. I had lots of reading last night. I had a question and a thought on this part. I also still have 2 questions up earlier in the doc, and I don't know if we'll go back to non-red blind areas, but I just want to put that on your radar as chair. My question is around point number 3. I'm hoping that someone could just explain the thought process behind section 3.
Yeah, so this is kind of consistent with the way this similar license is structured in the medical board, which basically says you can't come into the state of Colorado with this type of license and open a clinic and own a clinic and operate a clinic. In order to do that, you need to have, the other licenses that are required for a clinic, if that makes sense. And maybe Ashley Muller can give some clarification.
Okay, so it's precluding someone from coming out of state with fixed license and then opening a clinic, but it's not precluding someone, which is how I read it, maybe incorrectly, as if I'm an educator, I can't also have a clinic. Like if I'm an operator in Colorado. That's correct. It's not saying that.
I'm gonna ask Ashley to chime in.
Okay.
if you don't mind, I'll jump in. Great questions. Your last question is that an educator could own their own facility if they have a full license. So think about, let me back it up and kind of reframe it for you. So there are in the medical.
I think what you said makes sense, right? As long as you have an additional license, you can do that. But it's just that this standalone license alone does not allow for that, and that clears it up for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think you should think about the distinguished educator license as not being a full license. It's some, right? And so if they qualify for a full license, but they want to work in a teaching environment, they're absolutely allowed to do so. A full license gives you access to do anything. The distinguished educator license is a more limited license intended to do the work associated with an educational program.
That makes total sense. That answers that question. Thank you.
Sure.
And the second piece in this section is just a thought. And this will show up in the packet. It might already be in the packet, but as we continue on the Indigenous and Religious Subcommittee to flush out what the accelerated path looks like and what the various forms of accreditation are, one of the things that's not fully fleshed out, but that's in there is sort of some form of like community attestation or affirmation. And again, we don't have the details on that yet, but I thought that may also apply here. And so I wondered if it would be worth calling out that, when that's more fully fleshed out, it could be here. It might not apply here, but I just wanted to raise that for the group because it is another.
I actually think that's a great idea. Sam, would you be willing to add in point 4D in the parenthetical there, community reference? No, in additional to personal narratives, client references, community reference, or professional references.
That sounds like the best.
And just like a little bit of transparency around this could be this. So I did my best to try to add in some components of the recommendations from the Indigenous and Religious Use Subcommittee into this part, and then also the accelerated training part that we're going to talk about later. The tricky part is trying to make it broad enough to cover people that are not coming from that realm, but also might be eligible for accelerated training. So I'm thinking about people, for example, that are already licensed in Oregon. So I think, try to incorporate both things in a way.
I agree.
And that's part of the reason why it's in two places too in the recommendations. It's here in our recommendations, but also in the Indigenous and Religious Sub-Use.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that's the beauty of this is sort of both of these differing systems aimed at the same goals are starting to inform one another. And I think that's really awesome. So yeah, I have some notes in that section too. Okay, those are my only two on this red section.
Can we go back and get your notes from earlier? So I don't forget.
So it really is at the very, very top, license 1. I have two questions. Well, I guess one of them is kind of a multifaceted question. The first one is we are spelling out these additional accreditations that could fall into this. So Indigenous and Religious, massage therapists, acupuncture. That's great. I have no problem with anything that's written here. But my understanding is that license 1 is open to anybody. And so I wondered if having so much specific language made it seem that you had to have one of those. And if that's not the case, if we're saying anyone can show up for this license, even if you don't have a massage license, do we need to have an additional comma that says, or those not holding it a secondary license?
Yeah, I think that's great feedback. Can we add that, Sam?
Yeah, what line is that?
So it's under number 1, the very first line, the facilitated license when wellness, to include, what would you say?
To include those who do not hold a secondary license in the state of Canada.
And to include those who do not hold a secondary license, and Indigenous and Religious practitioners who treat, and then comma.
That's right.
Just a question: is the way that it's written, it's secondary license clear. I mean, or could we just say another professional license? I just don't know that everyone's going to understand secondary in that. So I would say another professional license, and as a way to make it clear.
Yeah, that's helpful, Dr. Cronin. Thank you. So instead of a secondary, hold another professional license.
All right. Okay. Second set of questions.
I'm sorry, could I pause you since we're on this? I just want to suggest that instead of using and in between those two terms, we change that to as well as, just to make sure there's a clear distinction. Sorry, don't mean to wordsmith, but
Oh, that's helpful.
That's helpful. Actually, I love, that triggers my new button. I love it.
thank you.
Other things, Skippy?
Yeah, so this question relates to 1 subsection 4. It also relates to the same language in 2 subsection 5. And this is maybe just coming from my lack of medical knowledge, but I'm curious, cardiovascular disease and diseases of the liver, I wonder what that does or doesn't include, because when I read that, I think like, well, does that include high blood pressure? In which case that's, a significant portion of the population. So I'm just kind of wondering what those 2 things can do. Again, I'm not a medical person, but I have a close friend who was sadly just diagnosed with like the first stage of cirrhosis, and is talking about, hey, is there a natural medicine treatment for me to work through my addiction? Now, I don't know what those contraindications are, but I'm like, does he have to go to a medical person, right? Those are the questions that I'm not clear about. And the current diagnosis is the other part of the question, which is to say someone who currently has PTSD, but like, what about a veteran who was diagnosed 20 years ago after coming back and has had, follow-up work and treatment and is no longer presenting? Does that person still have to seek a higher level? Those are my questions.
So for that last one, I think the answer is no. If they don't currently meet criteria for PTSD, then no, they would not need to seek a higher level of care or get consultation from a higher level of care. We had gone back and forth about this cardiovascular disease piece. I think at one point we had the word severe in there, but then the question was, how would someone at like level 1 licensure be able to screen for that, or even a mental health provider that doesn't work in medicine, how would they know how to screen for that? In terms of hypertension, that wouldn't be included because that's the second thing here, so that's brought out separately. I'm wondering if Dr. Vanderveer has thoughts about that piece.
I think in the interest of safety, I think it should be checked out if there's any cardiovascular disease. It is a broad term. You're right, and there's a lot of different things it could mean. My hand was slow to the pickup. I was actually wondering if in license 1 on line 1 we were talking about, is that list comprehensive or is that just examples? Because there's other people like RNs who probably should be on that list if it's comprehensive. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I had no more examples.
Just to button up the first point, which sounds like the easier one, which is like current diagnosis, as I read it, and I'll ask Ashley to weigh in, but participants who have been diagnosed, to me, that reads as if you ever had a diagnosis at any point, regardless of your condition now, you are excluded from this and the second group, and then you get pushed to the medical group, which I don't think is the intent. So I would ask if that needs to be clarified.
Dr. Ham, can I add? So I think I have 2 points. One is I think we could add parenthetical that says conditions in remission are not included or do not count, or remission diet. So normally what we do, Skippy, is if someone previously met diagnostic criteria for PTSD, but we don't think they currently meet criteria we would list it as in remission, and there's two modifiers there. You could say partial or in full remission, and we could just put a parenthetical to say not including remission diagnoses or something like that. Do you think that would satisfy what your concern is here?
I think so, but I'm also looking for you guys as the experts to weigh in. I'm raising it as a potential issue that's an oversight.
I think that's what I would recommend, is that we just put something in that says remission diagnosis not included or something like that. And then to speak briefly anecdotally about the cardiovascular part, having had a heart attack and having a diagnosis of cardiovascular disease, what I'll say to you is that it's actually pretty straightforward to get a letter from my cardiologist and clear me for activity. And I would want that letter as a participant to know I'm safe. So I'm not overly concerned with cardiovascular. And I have to do it all the time. Like if I want to go scuba diving, if I want to do this, if I want to do that, I get a cardiac clearance letter. My cardiologist tells me that it's safe for me to do that. And I think, so I would leave the cardiovascular disease part in there. And again, that's just anecdotal, but that's the way I see it.
Just so I understand that, the mechanics of that, if you are, say you are a wellness license holder and someone comes in and they check the box for high blood pressure, what you would say to them is like, hey, I need a doctor's clearance note. Here's how you would go do that. And then they would go do that and come back. And that process is easy, straightforward, not expensive, etc.
Yeah, no, I literally just had to do it a couple of days ago to go to do some activity, right? So I just email my cardiologist's office and say, this is what I want to do. And they'll either ask for me to come in for a checkup if it's been a while since they've seen me, or they'll review my numbers, say, we think it's fine, and they'll sign a letter. And all that was done digitally. So I didn't have to, I could do it all over email unless they wanted to see me. So it was all took place.
And a lot of people don't have primary care physicians. They don't have regular checkups. I suppose there's an argument to say they wouldn't even know they had a problem if that's the case. But let's say that they do it. They had it 5 years, so they don't have someone on speed dial to call. What do you think that process unfolds like?
I think that they should see a doctor. I mean, if they have cardiovascular for 5 years, they should go see a doctor. It's a good step. Yeah.
And Skippy, I really appreciate you holding space for like making sure we open the door for access as much as possible. I really feel strongly that's a liability risk for a facilitator that is not an MD if they're not requesting participation. I think they're really, because if something bad happens, even if it's not caused by the medicine, that person's family could go back and say, hey, you knew this person had hypertension and you didn't have them checked out by a medical professional. And I think that's a gateway for liability for facilitators.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Like I said, I'm not the expert in this, but unresolved questions. So thank you for helping me think through it.
I'd love to hear from Dr. Sisley and Dr. Vanderveer about more thoughts about this. Dr. Sisley.
Yep.
Oh, I was going to comment, but though I realized I think Brad, provided a good solution, so I will yield.
And Dr. Vanderveer.
I want to thank Brad for sharing an excellent example. I think that really illustrates it. I just want to add that, if we put a diagnosis of remission excluded, we need to make sure that the person filling out the form knows what that means. It's really common in the practice of medicine, speaking over 25 years of practice, for people to not understand what's been told to them by the doctor who was taking care of whatever they were taking care of. So, and obviously, Skippy, I also appreciate you standing for access, but I think that there can be missteps here. So, more care, I think, is warranted there.
Yeah, that's part of the reason I have that bit about the PCL5 in there for the PTSD, just because that's the area that I know the best. Like having some kind of screener that helps facilitators understand it, are these symptoms in remission or not? And it gets complicated with some of these because I don't feel qualified to determine if someone's in remission for cardiovascular disease. I'm not a medical doctor, and I want clearance, I think. Dr. Sophia Chavez. Dr. Chavez? We can't hear you, but if your sound gets working, please let us know. Oh.
Sophia, we still can't hear you. Do you have your headphones by any chance?
Wait, I can hear you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I've been listening to what everyone says, and I come across situations like this all the time. So this is really an important piece for us to be discussing to help the facilitators practice in a safe way. So what Dr. Connor said is perfect. And, like he made those suggestions of what he does. And that helps, like in the training, discussing these things with the facilitators, like our basic training. And then when Dr. Vandermeer talked about, well, will they understand what, remission means? And I'll give you a really good example. Yesterday, I was working at a facility and the question asked if the person's homebound. And the individual looked at me and he said, I'm not heading home right now. Do you see what I'm saying? And I smiled at him because he didn't understand the meaning of homebound in the medical terms. And so that's really important for us to just think about that when we are training our facilitators and we're asking things of them. I always like to get, if someone comes to see me and they have a prior diagnosis or they're working with another provider, I always want to talk to the provider. And I think that we should really encourage, I think it's part of the training of helping individuals be successful in this setting, in this practice, those who are new to this, to the rules of the overculture and clinical settings, is to just kind of go over all of these which may be very basic to some people, but they're not to others. I think that's really important. If they say, I haven't been to the doctor in 10 years, then I say to them, I can't see you. You need to go to the doctor. We need to find out what's going on with you. Because there could be a lot going on that I don't understand. If what you're talking about is exactly right, I don't want those liabilities. So just really helping the facilitators understand that. This can land on you. These are the recommendations that we make for facilitators to learn, because this can land on you. Okay, so I just really wanted to reiterate, I agree with what everybody is saying. And I think Dr. Connor made it very simple way for people to be, hey, just check with their doctor. And if we can help them figure out the easiest way to do that, that would be beneficial for our facilitators. Because if they're intimidated and reaching out to a cardiologist, that's not going to help them. We need to help them feel comfortable in reaching out to those facilitators, to those providers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chavez. I'm going to skip to Sam.
Oh, I'll wait till everyone's spoken, and then I just want to add that parenthetical that
I actually was going to ask to do that before we go forward. So I think after the word bipolar disorder period, adding a sentence that this limitation, this limitation does not apply in situations where where diagnosis is in remission. And one other point, Sam, is this same clause needs to be added. There's a similar version of this in the next license type. And so we need to add the same clause in that version as well. Down below. And I don't know the number offhand. I'm sorry. I can look it up.
Are you talking about behavioral health facilitator?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that we have a similar clause that has those things in bold, just like that. And we just need to add this to that as well.
Okay.
And Dr. Chavez, your hand is still up. Did you have anything else to add? Oh, thank you. Dr. Vanderveer.
Thanks, Dr. Hannum. One of the things we run into with getting medical clearance from outside doctors in our clinic is not a lot of knowledge about the cardiovascular effects of psychedelics. So if it hasn't already been talked about, it would be lovely to have a handout that the wellness facilitator and all these different levels could, fax over or send over to the cardiology office to say, here's the cardiovascular effects. Can this person tolerate this?
I think that's a great idea. Mr. White?
Thank you. Dr. Vanderveer brought up the topic, but it was in the context of how well doctors know the range of physical activity required in these types of experiences, and just knowing that it's also experience dependent. I think that there are some experiences that are quite subdued, and even if a doctor had the list of cardiovascular effects, are we talking about a a patient or a journey are having a really large experience and maybe running what's equivalent of a 5K or a 10K. And so with Dr. Connor's example, the clearance is dependent upon the activity. And so I would just like to welcome into this conversation that the range of activity within these experiences also need to be conveyed to doctors in some way so that they can make an accurate. Thank you.
Thank you, Swan. Dr. Sicily?
Both of those the last two comments are really important. I also want to just bring up on number one where it says the direct referral. I have a concern that some doctors are not going to feel comfortable giving a direct referral, but would feel okay with a specific clearance letter, like what Will was saying earlier. If we narrow it down for them, so I just wonder if we can change from direct referral to just a doctor clearance letter or medical clearance.
I think I'm okay with that. Any other thoughts on that? All right, so Sam, that would, Dr. Mandavir?
Just to add to what Sue was saying, the more specific we can get for the doctors, the better. If there's a template that says, this person can walk a mile without cardiovascular impact or whatever, like this very specifics make the liability a lot more palatable for the physician to check off.
I mean, I think part of the reason why, this has something to do with the license where someone is a medical provider. I think there may be cases where it's a letter may not be enough, that we actually need recommendations from a medical provider about how to do natural medicine safely. So trying to figure out a way to kind of broaden that a little bit. So maybe it's either is directly referred for natural medicine or provided medical clearance instead of. So part of the reason to have that last license where someone is a medical provider, it seems like there's going to be cases where there's going to have to be more input from the medical provider than just a clearance letter. Yeah, Dr. Beachy.
I'm just curious how this process interacts with the screening form that's being developed that facilitators will have to, be required to use. My understanding is the wellness facilitators will have to use that screening tool as well. Is that accurate?
Yeah, there was a recommendation in emergency response safety and ethics for a need for all facilitators to use a screening tool. Now, the details of that tool are like what we would say is, the difficulty of saying this full document, if we had a full document right now, putting that into rules is the challenge. And in case there are minor edits, we would have to go back into rulemaking. But with that recommendation, what we're going to be able to do in stakeholder meetings is get feedback on what should be included in the screening tools. So I think this can definitely be part of that screening tool as well as part of the informed consent process.
Yeah, it just seems that would need to be well coordinated so there isn't a lot of redundancy or
right.
processes for people to access the therapies.
So Sam, if you could on point 4.1, just adding directly referred for natural medicine or provided medical clearance. So after the words natural medicine, directly referred for natural medicine, or
after the word a licensed wellness natural medicine facilitator or not?
No, it says if the participant, so it's the second line there, with these conditions, if the participant is directly referred for natural medicine, and then adding right there, or provided medical clearance. Oh, no. After that. Yeah, but directly referred for natural medicine or provided medical clearance by someone. And then that needs to be updated in the behavioral license as well, I think.
Okay.
Thank you. Dr. Sisley, your hand is still up. Did you have more thoughts? Oh, thank you. Mr. Prim?
So I just had, excuse me, I just have one question. So can we change it up from someone licensed in the state of Colorado to someone licensed in their respective state? Because there may be tourists that are wanting to come from out of state for facilitation services here, and their primary care physician is in their home state.
Counselor Mueller, can you weigh in on that? Do you know, would that constitute practicing without a license in the state of Colorado?
No, it shouldn't. So long as so if I understand Mr. Priel's suggestion, but let's put that into a hypothetical, someone who lives in Wyoming and who has primary care in Wyoming gets a letter from their physician, which they then bring to a facilitator here in Colorado. I think that's fine legally.
Okay, so can we add that, Sam? So this is again in point one, the third line down, clearance by someone licensed in the state of Colorado or their respective state. And then we'll need to change that in the behavioral health one as well.
I might, or their respective either home state or state of residence.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I like doing the edits in real time. That saves me a lot of time in between meetings. That's nice. Thank you. All right. So the next set of changes has to do with the training program. So Dr. Connor worked really hard to reorganize the modules based on the suggestions in the last meeting. And then we also increased the time for several of the modules based on the recommendations in the last meeting. So this is a pretty lengthy change if we scroll down, Amanda. Keeps, yeah, I'm telling you to the education section. Yeah, so it's all red. Oh, no, keep going. It's all red because it's all been adjusted based on the suggestions from the last meeting. And many thanks to Dr. Connor for his work on this. Mr. Eshwin.
Yes, thank you. And I think I'm going to throw just a small wrench in the progress moving into this educational experiential. And I wanted to take a look back at the licensed distinguished educator language a little bit, because I'm trying to wrap my mind around it. It's so little confusing in the way that it's written. It still reads as though it would be exclusionary for somebody who is a licensed educator and also has a healing center license. So I wanted to see if we could add some language in there where maybe it says a licensed distinguished educator who does not also own a healing center license may not independently own and operate a healing center. I know it's a bit kind of wordy, but just the way that it's written, it would exclude anybody from owning and operating healing center license and being a distinguished educator.
Counselor Mueller, do you have thoughts on that? Is that okay?
Sorry, trying to get my mute button off. I appreciate the comment. The thing that I wanted to kind of focus on is the concept of a licensed distinguished educator. The people who hold that license type, right? That's not reflective of that person's role. It's reflective of the limitation on the license. And so I think we can assume that if not in the first year or two, but certainly those folks who qualify for full licensure, either under license 1 or license 2, might be educators, and we might all consider them to be incredibly distinguished and highly qualified. That's not what this term is intended to capture, though. And so the term licensed distinguished educator, a distinguished educator is someone who doesn't meet the qualifications for full licensure for some reason. It may be that they haven't taken they haven't yet taken some of the training that we will require on Colorado law, right? But and so this is intended to be a bridge. We can put in language. I don't want to suggest that Mr. Eshelman's comments should be ignored. We can put in language that basically reflects that someone holding a licensed distinguished educator license cannot own their own healing center. However, if you hold full licensure and you are an educator, otherwise you certainly could. So I hear his point. If you want to add that in, my suggestion might be to put in a subparagraph under that, under 3 Roman 3 Roman I, and just that it's something like licensees who hold a license 1 or 2, I think is what we're calling them, may own or operate a healing center and be an educator or something like that. We can work on that. There is a provision in the statute that precludes doubling up on certain types of licensure, and so I want to go back and double check that just to make sure we're not running afoul of the statutory limitations. But
just to be clear, if someone has a Facilitator 1 or Facilitator 2 license, they don't need to apply for a distinguished educator license.
That is absolutely correct.
Why would you apply for a lower level license if you already have a license that allows you to do that?
You would not, right? You apply for one license.
Yeah.
And the distinguished educator license is a limited scope license, right? Just to
So you meet the qualifications for 1 or 2.
Right.
Right. So it's like a temporary license. Apply for the 1 or 2 type.
Or if a program wanted to bring in someone to patient or training who is operating in Peru, but they want to come in for a year, 6 months as like an adjunct. This
exactly.
Instance they would use in order to facilitate in Colorado for the purposes of education.
That is correct.
Or things like that.
That is correct. So in a sense, it's almost it's either an entry vehicle for someone who has been teaching in Oregon or teaching in Peru to come in and help support educational programs, or it is someone who intends to move here, and that is kind of a temporary basis, if you will, or it's someone who, like Mr. Barami mentioned, wants to make a more permanent shift. They qualify under this limited license, and they can continue to teach here in the state until they qualify for full licensure.
James, does that make sense to you, or did that answer we were kind of looking for?
I guess I'm a little caught in the legalese, the wash of the legalese, but it's starting to make sense. I guess.
I think there's some other
information I might be missing.
Yeah. I think another point, Mr. Eshelman, is this is different than accelerated licensure. This is a totally different thing than the accelerated training program. So it could be like, you could see a scenario where someone would move to the state of Colorado because Dr. Beachy's program has invited them to come teach. They get this distinguished educator license. They decide they want to stay. They have a lot of the pieces of licensure, but not all the pieces of licensure. So then they can go through the accelerated licensure program and be a licensed 1 or 2 facilitator in the state of Colorado, and then own a healing center and do whatever they want because they have full licensure. Not whatever they want, but within the constraints of a license.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I was looking at this language sort of in isolation, maybe not taking into account the whole flow of licensure. But the language just kind of tripped me up. So I think I'm starting to follow.
Mr. Nguyen?
Thank you. I have a language recommendation that might, clear this up. I think that the dialogue is good. I think I'm understanding that the language is not matching up to the spirit of the intent here. So I think where James is held up is that it specifically says may not independently own or operate a healing center. So my suggestion would be one or two things: may not independently own or operate a healing center without the appropriate licensure could be one way. Or another way that we might say this is saying that this distinguished educator license alone doesn't qualify somebody or approve somebody to own or operate a healing center with the appropriate licensure. And I'm wondering if language like that is matching up to what we're having in dialogue here today.
Ms. Muller?
I actually appreciate those comments. I might go one step further though, and reflect that I think a license. I agree, first of all, with Dr. Nguyen's comment, and if you're going to own a healing center, you will have to get a license through the Department of Revenue for licensure. And so any facilitator licensure will be insufficient to own and operate a healing center absent that secondary licensure, right? That independent licensure for the facility. Having said that, I think that the licensed distinguished educator will never, under the intent of these rules, that licensure alone will not, it does not make you eligible to own or operate a healing center. The whole purpose of the licensed distinguished educator is to affiliate with someone else with an educated a program, right? An educational program. And so the licensed distinguished educator should not be the one who is running the show, if you will. Does that clarify a little bit?
Yes, thank you. Dr. Beachy?
Just a brief comment about the licensed distinguished educator, that along with the other types of educators named, this would also make it possible for folks who have been on FDA-sponsored studies with psilocybin and other medicines to come into the state and teach. So I just wanted to add that to the...
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be like a lovely thing to submit as part of the 500 World or biographical statement or the attestations, right? To help get this license. Dr. Vanderveer?
More of a comment, is sort of a question is, in our experience with providing ketamine-assisted therapy trainings, there's an issue with, obviously, medical malpractice. And what we've had to do for some of our out-of-state faculty is bring them in, put them on our staff at our clinic, and then get them medical malpractice through our umbrella of medical practice in our clinic. So I don't know how this is going to work for a distinguished faculty, educator from the outside. How are they going to get liability? It's not the problem of this committee to figure that out, but I don't see that ever being covered by liability, frankly.
Yeah, I think it's an important point. I mean, I think the question about liability insurance broadly for the full board has been a big question mark in a lot of subcommittees, but it's an important point. And also, I think it still makes sense to build this license right now because of the need to have educators come into the state to help us train facilitators. Thank you, everybody. Are we ready to move to the education piece? Any other last comments? Hearing none. So the major changes, and I don't know, I might invite Dr. Connor just to outline the major changes in this section, just to make sure I hit them all.
As if that, I don't know that I could, the major changes are the whole thing, but basically based on the conversation at the last meeting, what I tried to do was consolidate content so it wasn't being repeated in multiple courses, to reformat and create a new course that deals with relational boundaries and introduction to physical touch. That's probably the biggest change in this document. If there's a completely new section, and that would be Roman numeral 3 in the list, and upped it from what was 135 hours to 150 hours of education. And so I didn't remove anything that was in the list originally. So the list that existed before my edits, it's still comprehensive, but there were a number of places where content was being covered that seemed to be redundant. And so I reduced that to one place that I thought was the best place for that fit. And so it will be a bit of a departure from the way this list or the way this proposal looked the last time you all saw it. And so I think it's good for us to have a discussion about it. I do think it's reflective of that conference, and that you can agree with that or not. But I tried really hard not to depart from what was originally established, just to consolidate and streamline it.
Yes, I think that's 100% the case. The other, part of what we upped the hours for was the self-care and self-development module that was at the recommendation of SUBCOMMITTEE. There was a recommendation by a non-voting participant to add a section about chronic pain. I want to make sure that's in there. Can you scroll down a little bit, Amanda?
That's a good point. I'm not sure I remembered that one, so we may need to add it. I don't remember adding.
A little bit more. I thought I added it before I sent these steps up. Yeah, so number 7 was added, training the use of psychedelics for chronic pain, as maybe there is going to be more and more research in that area.
Well, that's good.
Was added.
Thanks.
So module 4, number 7.
Yeah, I think I upped the hours for the introduction of child-informed care as well. It's just wherever we talk about upping the hours, I upped.
Yeah, and scroll down one more time. I'm gonna think. Yep, keep going. So I'm hoping voting participants were able to kind of read through this list. I don't want to spend time going line by line if we can avoid it. Keep going a little bit, Amanda, for me towards the end. One more. Right. So this title of this last module was modified to say facilitator development in self-care. That was a recommendation, I believe, by a non-voting participant. And then that module was increased. So I don't know if there's any discussion about the changes made. I want to give my thanks again to Dr. Connor for spending so much time revamping that. Skitty.
Yeah. First, Dr. Connor, everyone who has put time into this, it's just like such an immense body of work, and reading through it, I just had so much pride, honestly. It's just so well constructed and comprehensive, and the opportunities are amazing. And it's a huge body of work. So I just wanted to say thanks to everyone, but Dr. Connor especially, for spending so much time, and Dr. Hannon before that. So thank you guys. I just have one question, and I also just want to clarify, because at least I heard in the last kind of conversation of thanks for advocating for, and I just want to say, when I'm advocating for something, I will make that explicitly clear. Most of my questions are coming from a place of naivety or just lack of information, and so I'm seeking clarity with the assumption that others in this group will know more than me, and it will spark discussion. So this is another one of those advocacy piece. But as I read through this, part the drug effects, contraindications, and interactions, and I just have to ask the question to those who do know this topic matter: 5 hours, ? Enough? I think about just drug and supplement interactions, and I'm sure people spend years on just that. And I don't have in my head what the deliverables are for this module, but I just wanted to raise that question about all of these things in that time frame.
Dr. Connors.
I don't know if you want to respond for a second now.
No, I don't know.
So the thing here is that this is more just to give the facilitators an introduction to this topic, but if there are going to be, there's that document that exists to be, that was created, and I think we'll discuss it in this subcommittee, but after end of February or next time we all come together to meet, this idea that we're providing that map or that appendix of drug interactions that pharmacologists developed for us. But I think you can make their efforts be longer, and I also think that the facilitator is not going to have a medical degree nor be prescribing medications. And so what we want to do is just introduce the topics of interactions, not have that be the person who figures out those interactions or those contraindications, but instead to know when they should be seeking help or an opinion from somebody. And so this is really to provide the information, say, you should know the substances that your participants are putting in their bodies, and then you should know what to do if they are, which maybe to refer them to a medical provider to make sure that they are contraindications or possible interactive effects. That was my take on it.
I think that's beautifully stated, Dr. Connor. Thank you. Dr. Vanderveer?
I agree with Dr. Connor. I think an introduction, 5 hours is going to be fine for a facilitator. Medical folks might want or need more. One thing in here was 6 models of substance abuse addiction recovery. That, to me, feels like it doesn't belong under that category. So I just want to flag that.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Can we move that, Sam, to the physical and mental state instead? Yeah, so 5.6, just cut that and paste it into the physical and mental state module instead, higher up.
I think it's
right there. Yeah. So as number 10 there instead, that makes perfect sense to me.
I should have noted that there's probably a couple places where I missed things, so I appreciate you catch that.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Yeah, Dr. Bader?
Just speaking from experience, when you learn in a 5-year module certain things and you pass your exam, you get your certificate, but now you have a client in front of you. I think you need to have like a handout or something to refer back to, because you're not going to remember the details.
Yeah, and what Dr. Cotter was talking about is a really comprehensive, amazing document that was submitted by a non-voting participant who's a clinical pharmacist to the Ethics, Emergency, and Safety Subcommittee. So we're figuring out a way to make that kind of largely available. It's a beautiful document that kind of goes through any possible medication and supplement you could think of and just what the risks would be. That person worked really hard on that. And I can't remember their name, I'm sorry, but I'm sure.
I think it was Kristen Spear and Nikki Settled.
Yeah, and they just spent a huge amount of time on it.
Yeah, but the quadruple P, I always forget my all 4 letter P standard.
All right. Psychedelic Public Policy Partnership.
It's always the partnership.
Yep.
You'll notice I used to be on that group before I was a member of this committee, and I still don't try to tackle that name. So it's a hard one to remember. All right. Any other thoughts on these education pieces? Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to take a look up at the 6-month supervision and maybe
We're not quite there yet. I'm gonna hold you to that because we're gonna get there down below, if that's okay.
And so the one thing I was going to point out, and maybe it's not necessary, but I didn't actually know. Sorry, thinking until same time, all these names. Never mind. I'm going to.
Sam, as I'm looking at this for module 4.7, can you change training in the use of psychedelics to training in the use of natural medicines for chronic pain? Thank you. All right, no other comments on this section? So then the last modifications were to the area of accelerated training and then also specific requirements for that 6-month supervision. And want to give some credit to Dr. Hughes for the pieces about accelerated training that there's also information from this section from the Indigenous and Religious Use Subcommittee, and then to Dr. Beachy for submitting suggestions about requirements for that 6-month consultation period. So I know, Skippy, I think you said you had some thoughts on this accelerated training piece.
Yeah, just a general comment. I don't think we need to the wordsmith this here, but since there have been updates to the work in the IR that kind of more fully builds that out, I was just going to suggest that staff look at those updated recommendations and just try to have them mirror better.
I think that makes good sense. And my understanding is that both recommendations are going to the full board tomorrow separately. So
yeah, I think that works too, and it allows us to when we get into the drafting portion or drafting recommendations to the rules, we could take what we have from both subcommittees and incorporate it. And then have you guys look at it as well as stakeholders for further feedback.
Yeah, actually, I guess I'd just flag this as well on page 22, subsection A, under accelerated options for applicants with significant experience providing national license services. I just that also might be a place for some unification of language, just as for staff.
Sorry, Skippy, can you tell me which specific section? Say that one more time.
Yeah, so it's page 22 in my document, and it is, let's see, what is the biggest section?
Is it facilitator supervised practice requirements? That's page 22 on the live document.
Yeah, page 22. So it's like subsection A, B, C, D, that area, and it's under the heading of 3, which is on page 21, accelerated options for applicants with significant experience providing natural medicines. That struck me as the second place where you might want to try to sync up some of that stuff.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
Yeah, Sam, on this point D3 in the parenthetical, can we add community references there too? So personal narratives, client references, community references, or personal or professional references. Dr. Vanderveer?
Thank you. This bullet 2, at least 40 participants. We will have, we've trained a lot of people in Oregon. None of them have 40 participants under their belt because they're getting their licenses, but they're not getting that much experience right away.
Yeah, this is kind of trying to find a middle ground, because if you look at the recommendations from the Indigenous and Religious Use Subcommittee, they're recommending much, much more hours than that. So trying to kind of honor the fact that there are going to be people that have been operating in that Indigenous and religious use space that have many, many hours. And then there's going to be people coming from Oregon and trying to kind of meet halfway. Yeah, Dr. Chavez.
I wanted to share that I was talking to someone and they were telling me that they had experience with having facilitated 50 sessions. And, I've been processing that because all of my work has been done in Indigenous communities. Many years ago, probably like, I don't know how many, 10 years ago, I started helping. And that's what we called ourselves. We were helpers. And so there's not that formal word of a training. I wasn't training in facilitation. That's just not the way it's communicated, right? We're going to be having ceremony with the sacred plants, and we have the elder who is going to be deciding how much each individual is going to receive, and then we have all of the individuals who are going to be that individual's helper. And in the overculture language, you're training and facilitation. You see the differences? And that's where I think those hours, because you're a helper for years.
So can I ask, should we add that as an or for point 2 here? Like accelerated training applicants must demonstrate experience helping with or facilitating?
Yes, because I think that so when I was listening to this individual, what I think of as the facilitator is the individual who determines how much the person is going to receive, and like the head doc, the head medicine man or woman curandero that is watching the program, seeing what how all of the participants or patients, in my case, community members, how they're reacting to the medicine. And so I think that that's a good idea, because I think that the hours can be overwhelming when you put it in a linear space compared to the space, because it's kind of like you're in training.
Just to push a little bit, it's not hours, it's participants. So theoretically, you could do 4 groups with 10 people and have met that requirement.
Yeah.
Just saying that. So
it's just trying to find the language that bridges those two together is good. And I mean, I'm not suggesting anything right now, but I'm just saying that's why I think some of the confusion comes in, because you're in training for years, but it just looks and feels different. I think when people are talking about 2,000 hours, are you kidding? Well, that's over years of time.
yeah.
So bringing those two together will be important for us.
I think that makes good sense. So the other nice thing about adding something like experience helping with or facilitating is you could count your experience under supervision. So it doesn't have to be independently facilitating. You could also count the hours where you were under supervision with a curandero or someone else. Yes, Mr. Wick.
Thanks. I'd like to thank Dr. Chavez and just support what you're saying there. I run into this a lot when I'm vetting facilitators for our referral network, and I think the range of experience is also important here. I recently had an application with an individual who says that they had supported over 250 individuals, but after a little bit of conversation, their role was in the capacity of providing like journey music and as a musician primarily in these spaces. And so that's obviously a very important aspect of ceremonial work. However, I don't know if that is equivalent to somebody actually being qualified to educate in this way. And so I wonder if there is I know that it says it here in bullet point 3, the experience and the skill of the instructor, but I just want to highlight that there's a little bit of a vacuum here, because you'll never really be able to verify the contents of that experience, because most of the time that is held in private. You don't want to expose people's identities, things like that. So if somebody says, hey, I supported X amount of folks and I was the primary facilitator, I was a supporter or whatever, I just think that there's this difficulty of verifying. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be a difficult task for whoever verifies these licenses. 100%. Sam, can we make a change to number 3 instead of additional materials collected by the training program? That's using an assumption that training programs are going to be doing accelerated training applicants. Can we say instead additional materials provided by applicant instead of collected by the training programs? Thank you. Dr. Beachy?
Yeah, I had a similar comment to what Jimmy brought up, that natural medicine services in my mind could include like preparation and integration and music, other types of things. So I wonder if I don't know how to be more specific, but it could be helpful to say like direct facilitation or something like that, if that's what you're aiming for. Or administration even. I don't know. It just might be more clarifying.
I like that suggestion too. I'm going to let Sam catch up with us here. Let me know when you're ready, Sam. So then, in point 2, helping with or facilitating the administration of natural medicine instead of the natural medicine services. Thank you.
I also agree that 40 is a high number, and some of the people who are, like for example, approved to offer MDMA therapies may have maybe more like 5 to 8 participants and maybe 20 medicine sessions, something like that. Just because it's such an experimental phase, and I know MDMA isn't natural medicine, but with psilocybin, this would probably prioritize people who have offered group therapies.
So maybe instead of with at least 40 participants, it should be with at least 40 sessions. So that it could be the same participant but multiple sessions.
Well, I think the sessions maybe is the intent of the number and not the number of people, if I'm hearing accurately.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Dr. Chavez?
I wanted to share a little bit about what my particular world looks like, and it's different for all Indigenous people. We all don't like fit into one category, but for example, I might go down to Mexico and the curandero or curandera says, this time they're going to assist me in the plática. And the plática is the intake. And so I sit with the individuals and with her, and they're discussing and they're talking about the conditions that the individual has, just getting the history, the full history. And so based on the history, and the conditions that they have, now we've got this group of 10 people who are going to be receiving the medicine. And now it's time to receive the sacred mushroom and determine how much individuals are going to get. And then so the curandera or curandera will look at you and say, based on what we know about this individual, what we know physically about what they told us, their history and the intake, and then what you felt energetically, what amount would you start with? Do you see what I'm saying? And so then I might say, well, this amount. And then she would say, well, let's consider, so they pull you back and say, you didn't take this or this into the consideration. And so you should lower that dose. Or, well, we might up it a little bit, but they'll explain to you why they made that determination. Okay. And then, those really large doses that I hear about, that's just never been done in my cities. Never, ever. It just hasn't been done, because then when you're administering this time you might be doing the music, like someone brought that up, that they had really only been doing the music. But the music is a very important part, because I've had a shaman get upset with me because I was drumming and I got lost in my own drumming. And he said, this is not your trip. This is not your journey. You're here to be the drummer that's guiding the rest, and you need to keep your focus and your head on. And I mean, he got pretty aggressive with me, and it was like, you're not doing your job here. So all of these pieces are part of this journey. And so many Indigenous people or people from the community are going to have been trained in each one of these components. And it may look different from the overculture model, but then, then afterwards, there's usually a sweat lodge, and then there's an overnight, and then there's a breakfast. So it's like a process. So even the next day when we're integrating, your teacher is asking you what you thought when the debriefing is taking place. So this is just, there's so many different pieces to the training in the Indigenous model. And it's a slower process than what we see here in the United. Well, I don't know. I've never been trained in the United States. I'm assuming it's a slower model, but who knows? But because I haven't seen, I've not had the ketamine training or some of these other trainings that some of the people on our board have had. But that just kind of gives you an idea of what the process would look like for individuals that might come in with a background. And so, for whoever is going to be determining the qualifications, to sit with these individuals and find out what they do know. Because because the form may not capture enough, is what I'm saying. So we need to give them the opportunity to explain what they do know. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shana. It was much appreciated. Thank you. All right. And then the last set of changes has to do with having specific requirements for during that 6-month consultation. And many thanks to Dr. Beachy for providing these pieces. And my understanding, this is coming from your work in consultation in other areas, Dr. Beachy.
Right. This comes from supervised professional spiritual caregiving in situations that are pretty high intensity. So I hope it's helpful. I think that some things are best learned through mentoring or best supported through mentoring. And so I would recommend that there is some structure to this supervised time that people are spending in the groups, and that isn't just a free-for-all. And I would be curious about Dr. Vanderveer's perspective on, how that time could be best utilized.
I think your point is well taken and lines up very nicely with Dr. Chavez's point a moment ago. Mr. Eshelman?
Yes, thank you. So I wanted to, was there a recommendation for the amount of hours that are going to be spent in consultation over the 6 months, or are we just saying 6 months?
We don't have a specific recommendation in there yet.
So are we, is the assumption then to leave that to the training programs, or is that something we're going to add into this?
It's a good question. I'd love thoughts on that.
My feelings are, just as kind of a suggestion here, somewhere in the realm of 5 hours per week, which over the course of 26 weeks would be about 130 hours of supervision. That plus or minus an hour or two here or there, kind of feels like the right place to start.
Thank you for that suggestion. Dr. Vanderveer, do you have thoughts on that?
It's a good question. It's that balance of what's really realistic for professionals to undergo, and what do we really need to provide safe and effective, graduation from supervision. I personally think a couple of hours a week over 6 months is, a couple of hours a week, basically, I think is a maximum of what, we could reasonably ask a busy professional to take on. So if the board felt like that, more hours than that were needed, I think you have to get a longer period of supervision, personally.
Yeah, so 2 hours a week would be in line with consultation periods for like other therapies and like in my realm as a psychologist, like during internship and postdoc, we generally had 2 hours a week, 2 to 4 hours a week.
Oh, can I just?
Of course, yes.
To Dr. Beachy's point, I think it is important to have at least some structure to the curriculum for supervision, and not have it just be free-flowing. And I have a few other things I could suggest to her list.
Yeah, it would be nice to hear those things.
Well, someone brought up, I think it was Skippy, brought up self-care. And I think that supervision is a good place for supervisors to be reviewing, the facilitator's ability to stay in their own regulation as people undergo extreme states, for example, and also what their self-care practices are outside of the sessions that they're facilitating.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I'm thinking, Sam, too, that we said earlier that it has to require ethics. So we need to have ethics on this list as well.
That's what I was getting. Okay, you took the words out of my mouth. I think.
Yeah, that's written elsewhere that it needs to require ethics, but we need to have it on this list as well. Thank you.
Right. I think the use of touching is included under ethics, I think, there.
Yes, we have it separated out on here for Dr. Beachy's suggestion, relational boundaries and use of touch. I think the thought for that ethics piece was more that you could actually talk about ethical issues that come up in cases in vivo, kind of. Mr. Eshelman?
Thank you. I think it's necessary to add a little bit of color to my suggestion. The amount of hours that we're recommending for practicum, for about 40 hours, just feels extraordinarily low. For parts of the population who will be stepping in to do this work, people who maybe don't have experience within an educational background or have minimal experience with psychedelics or guiding psychedelic experiences, and so I see that 5 hour baseline as a sort of continuation with the original recommendations that I set out when we were considering the amount of hours for practicum. I said somewhere in the neighborhood of about 200, and so this kind of feels like a nice the 5 hours feels like a nice way to support people as they step into the facilitation experience. So anything lower than that, I think as we carve hours out of the practicum and make these supervisory hours lower, I just want to bring to our attention that there's an implication of potentially reducing the amount of safety that is both within the program, safety within the facilitator's experience, and safety too within the client's experience as well. So I do think that we have to find right give and take here. I don't think it's 2 hours a week. I don't think it's maybe 3 hours a week, but I think it's really valuable for us to keep in mind that a lot of people who are going to be obtaining these licenses are going to need a lot of support.
Thank you for that perspective, Mr. Ashman. I appreciate it. Dr. Beachy?
And just to comment on this wording that we're developing, that you all are developing on the structure of the supervised time, I think it would be helpful to put something in there about case review, because I think when people present their cases, that's when you can see what's happening actually in the sessions. And so I would recommend something in there about regular case review. And then to Mr. Eshelman's point, I tend to agree with Dr. Vanderveer on the weekly hours. I just think that if people are paying for the supervised hours and it's 5 hours a week, it will just really cause problems in regard to access, and also finding faculty who would be available for distinguished faculty be available for that number of hours. But I also really appreciate the intent of his comments, and that you all could find a good balance.
Thank you, Dr. Beachy. So Sam, for that point G, can we say consultation must include case review? Thank you. Dr. Vanderveer?
Two questions. One is, if the person's in 6 months of supervision, but they have no cases at all that they're working with, I think that's a different thing versus a person who's very busy facilitating and is also in supervision. So we might want to consider that. And the other piece is it even possible, and maybe it's not, but is it possible to have different periods of supervision required for these different tiers of licensure?
I think that's an interesting question. I mean, I think going back to Mr. Eshelman's point, I do think we're setting a minimum here, and that training programs might decide to do more than what's required, and maybe advertise themselves as providing more consultation and more support post completion of didactics. And that might be a selling point for a training program to include. So I think when we think about an hour, if we think about hours within that 6 month consultation, really the goal is to set a minimum requirement. Dr. Kumar?
Thank you, Dr. Ham. Dr. Beachy, thank you so much for this edition. Under H3 cultural competence, when we're talking about articulate awareness and demonstrate awareness, I wonder if we could add in a component there so that it includes when the facilitator's experience does not intersect with the elements of the care encounter. So what I'm suggesting is articulate awareness upon reflection when a care encounter intersects or does not intersect with elements of one's social cultural identity, and the same for demonstrate awareness. Any thoughts on that? I welcome. Thank you.
I think that's a lovely suggestion. Thank you. I'm wondering if any of the voting board or subcommittee members have thoughts about hours. think that the suggestion I'm going to make, Sam, is in that point F above, after during the 6-month consultation, adding a parenthetical, which must include at least 50 hours.
So on
F, yeah. Applicants may change your charge for services they provide. Just oh wait, no, I'm wrong. Go if you could go a little bit higher up. Sorry, Amanda. If you could screen. I mean then.
yeah, it's good.
Yeah, sorry. So it's point A. So facilitators must complete 6 months of consultation, and then parentheses, which must include at least 50 hours.
Listen.
Dr. Connor.
So I was trying to get better on this. So what we're saying is, and I'll be honest, Sam, I don't have track conversations closely. What we're saying is that they have to complete. It doesn't. Do all 50 hours need to be done within 6 months, or it's a minimum of 6 months and a minimum of 50 hours?
Yeah, that's a good point. So maybe facilitators must complete a minimum of 6 months of consultation, which must include at least 50 hours, or a minimum of 50 hours, maybe. So what I'm thinking about there, Dr. Connor, is kind of like a model of like if we were supervising an intern, we would probably have an individual meeting and a group supervision meeting every week would be the goal, and then you create some flexibility around some weeks you're going to miss.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think 50 hours in 6 months seems like a lot to me, but I think 50 hours is a good number, and I think that if they do that in a year or a year and a half, that's also fine, right? So,
but don't want them to do it in 2 months.
right. So and that's kind of, LPC. We don't have that, right? We can't do 1,000 hours in a year face to face and stuff. So I think I'm screwed.
Yeah, Dr. Peachy.
Yeah, I'm thinking again about the people who will be facilitating these supervisory groups, and that there'll be a challenge to, find enough people who have conducted 40 facilitation sessions and are approved. And so I wonder, I'm just putting that before the committee as an access issue. Is that?
But if you don't have those 40 hours, you could apply for the Distinguished Educator license.
Okay. Perfect.
Accelerated training is kind of the highest level of licensure, because basically we're giving you a full license without meeting all the other requirements that other people are being asked to meet.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. So those are different things. And so you could easily be a distinguished educator and not have done 40.
So then the license itself will not require any kind of minimum number of sessions or anything like that the person has facilitated. They'll just have to So to Dr. Vanderveer's point, I wonder if people are not actively engaged, but will they be able to attend these supervisory sessions, and what would be the baseline requirement for how they're engaging the facilitation in order to participate in supervision?
I think that's an important question of whether we should make a requirement of having had some facilitation. I mean, the practicum is the closest thing, but it's pretty broad. Any other thoughts on that, or do we leave it as is?
I mean, would it be possible just to say that they need to be actively engaging in facilitated care in some way? I mean, even if it's a very minimum amount, they would still have a case to bring into the supervisory space.
Yeah, can we add that in point A, Sam? So just at the end, facilitators need to be actively engaged in natural medicine services during consultation. And we'll let the supervisor kind of define that. Dr. Bean?
Yeah, sorry, natural medicine services.
Yeah, period. Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. And then we'll let the supervisor kind of define that. Dr. Vanderveer?
So I'm just wondering about, again, access, and if someone is not if they're not associated with the service center, how will they be able to have cases during their supervision?
So I think it's a broader question. I mean, one thing to know is that, we're talking about authorized service locations that are not healing centers. There's other discussions and other subcommittees that kind of address some of that. Dr. Peachy?
Sure. Oh, no, sure. Yeah, I think that the intent of it is that when someone completes the training, that they will have the completion of the training certificate, but that as they get started with the facilitation, that would have to be supervised for a period of time. So it could be that someone would, there would be a year-long gap, I would imagine, for some people, between the completion of a certificate and then when they actually start facilitating, then they would need to have mentoring. Does that make it a little bit more clear? Well,
Thank you.
Is there any way we can kind of disclose that or have that stated? Should we do that in this? I think that'll help us with.
Yeah, I mean, that's the intent of that last sentence, but if you think that's not clear enough, Sam, maybe it's facilitators need to be actively facilitating natural medicine services during consultation. Would that be more clear?
I'm reading it again, and I think engaged is fine.
Okay, but can we add at the end before the period during the consultation? Thank you.
And I just for clarity, sorry, it's Dr. Powder, facilitators need to be actively engaged in, but I would just say in the delivery of natural medicine services, just to clear.
Okay. Yeah, I think that sounds good. All right. Any other discussion on this last change to the recommendations?
Yes. We had two bullets towards the bottom where Dr. Vanderveer added self-care here and ethics, and we added ethics. Now, if you want, we can add a description here. I think that it would be helpful.
Yeah, I think demonstrate active self-care practices, and other people can chime in too.
Dr. Vanderveer, when you were conceptualizing self-care, do you mind elaborating here?
Well, I was going to suggest that the supervisor might encourage the supervisee to try new self-care practices that they may not have tried before, to inquire about the frequency of their self-care practices and the effects that they are noticing from self-care behavior.
Okay.
I think it's really about inquiring and having a conversation about it. I don't know how to language that.
James.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think group process around somebody's the facilitator's own experience, physical, emotional, mental experience in facilitation for others. Also, both within the experience and after the experience. We can also apply here to utilize these spaces as group practicing. So perhaps bringing in self-care modalities from group meditations to perhaps suggesting, breath work, or suggesting these different modalities that help nervous systems kind of reset.
I think the last piece to scan is the supervisor should be inquiring or assessing for things like compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma in supervisees.
About what was that, fatigue?
Compassion fatigue. And vicarious trauma in supervisees. Yeah.
Dr. Beer.
To just add a little more to Dr. Hanneman's comment, the way that the shadow of the guide gets triggered, through our own unresolved traumas as guides. I don't know how that can be languaged, but an important role of supervision is to explore that in a safe space where one can get more competent over time by facing, one's own blind spots. And so that goes a little bit into vicarious trauma when your own triggers are activated from your own history.
I think maybe more broad, maybe discussing with the supervisory the impact of facilitation on the supervisee, just broadly. Dr. Kumar?
I'm wondering what the committee thinks about adding a component in for the supervisor to facilitate integration of the supervisee's psychedelic experiences into the training. Is that an overreach?
I think I need more information.
Well, we're talking about self-care, and especially when a person is in training, the unstated expectation is that person has their own psychedelic experiences, but it'd be really worthwhile, I think, for the supervisor to be able to discuss those experiences as they apply to being a facilitator.
So I don't think we can't, the state isn't able to mandate people to have their own psychedelic experiences. I mean, let's be careful of that language, I think. But maybe in point 4, we could add a statement about the supervisor encourages supervisees to integrate their own experiences of non-ordinary states of consciousness. Is that too far, Ms. Mueller?
I don't think it's too far, but let's make sure that it doesn't feel like that's mandatory.
Yeah.
So
maybe just more broad than that, even the supervisor encourages supervisees to continue their own integration work. Something like that. Dr. Connor, did you have thoughts?
I think it's a well-made point, and I'm not sure it needs to be legislated. So if we didn't say anything at all, it's not prohibited nor permitted. And I think that's a better path, in my opinion, because we avoid this idea that we might be suggesting that integration is needed for, that you need to have had your own experience. And we avoid the idea that we might be promoting the need for personal experience with psychedelics. And so I think the point is well made. I'm not sure we need to legislate it. And so for me, I would recommend not saying it.
I might even go one step further. I agree with you, Dr. Connor. Sam and I were batting around this last point that we included discussion of physical, mental, spiritual impacts of facilitation on supervisees. I wonder if it actually cabins up under that context anyway, in a more broad point.
Wait, well, Kim. I think it's a worthwhile suggestion, Dr. Kumar. I think we're treading kind of on that thin wire in terms of our language here. And then we do need to add some description for ethics, and I think our intent was to make this ethics section more of the supervisee engages in case review surrounding ethical issues. I don't know if there's other things that need to go in there. Skippy.
Yeah, I just wanted to, it's an unformed thought, so bear with me if I'm just kind of responding to the conversation that was just going on around facilitators having direct experiences and integration with non-ordinary states of consciousness. And I understand legal line we're dancing around. And again, I'm just kind of free flowing here. In my work as a coach, which is different in many ways, but related to the same type of processing that happens in a psychedelic container, I tend to believe that you can really only take a client as far as you've gone. There are different schools of thought for sure. But for me personally, I would have much more trust in a facilitator who has gone to those depths, who's had those experiences. So I do think that there's value, even if it's not a required uniform value, in encouraging facilitators to do that work. And I'd also point out that non-ordinary states of consciousness do not require the use of natural medicines. There are other means of attaining those things without ingesting anything but air. And so I do think it would be valuable to have some language and not to leave it blank, but I recognize the challenges of that.
I mean, I think the challenge for any of us that has done any training in this space is that is generally a stance that the community takes in this situation. And also, we can't regulate it. So I think, to your point, Skippy, if I were to go to a facilitator, I would likely ask that facilitator if they'd experienced the medicine before. And if a facilitator hasn't, they're going to have to decide how they answer that question. But I don't think DORA or the state can mandate facilitators, even non-DORA. I understand your point's well taken about it doesn't necessarily require medication, but there are people that can't do holotropic breath work. There are people who can't do, there are people for whom this is the traditional ways we think about non-ordinary states. It's just not open to them, and we can't shut them out of this career field in legislation.
Yeah, sure. And notice that nowhere did I suggest that mandating it was language I'm considering, but I think within the bounds of self-care, someone who is facilitating is, as you very eloquently said, is going to take on, or has the potentiality to take on, the trauma of those that they're sitting with energetically. It's also likely to trigger things for them that may have been latent or unconscious. And without some type of active process to work through that, their ability to be functional as a facilitator is temporal. In my mind, to my practice, they will need some type of active work to work through that. And so that's, what we've discussed. There are a couple ways to do that, but there are many more as well.
I'm just going to ask point blank, do you think we need to add more things to that self-care description? Do you think that doesn't cover what you're talking about?
No, I didn't have that note, so I was comfortable with it as written. I just hearing.
No, the one that's up there now.
Or had said, and then, I'm just kind of.
Okay, yeah. I just want to make sure our base is covered, because I want to make sure what we wrote today fits with what you're saying, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Under point 6.
Sure, and I've got my other document up, but there was a place for self-care previously. So have we replaced that with this?
No, so this is it. This is a new section. So that exists in the didactic training. This is a new section in it's section about what has to be required in consultation. And so what we've written together today is demonstrate active self-care practices, encourage the supervisor to suggest the use of alternative practices, and inquire frequently regarding self-care activities and their effects, The supervisor should be inquiring about compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma in supervisees, and there should be discussion of physical, mental, and spiritual impacts of facilitation on the supervisees.
Yeah, I mean, I think the inclusion of that clearly prioritizes this and says that this is an important part of your role and provides guiding language for how one would explore that, which I think is appropriate because it's going to be different for everyone. So yeah, I think that's great. And thanks for letting me just sort of...
Thank you, Skippy. Yeah, I want you on board. It's important. Dr.
Yeah. I was back on the ethics squad. I was just going to suggest that we add a little more language there, and if that's okay. But I think it should actually say supervising engaged in case review focused on ethical issues instead of surrounding and engage in ethical decision making as part of our supervising engaged in case review on focus on ethical issues and actively engages in ethical decision making as part of this review. Ethical decision making
I think that's updated
as part of this review. That's all I got.
Thank you. Mr. White?
Thanks. I'd like to take that one step further. I have a comment on the ethics part and the self-care part, but since Dr. Connor just brought this up, thank you. I think that it's important to determine who is making the call if there is an active and ongoing ethical situation. And so I think adding this language on engage on ethical decision making as part of this review is a step in the right direction. As you know, when I see facilitators going through challenging, difficult situations, they're really looking for consultation from the supervisor. So who is the one who's actually making the call in the field on the ground, with the client? And so I would just raise that, for this group, if we want to clarify it here, where the division of responsibility is. And then as far as the self-care part, I think that it's good language. What I find is that it's still a little bit vague for me in implementation. I think the discussion of these spaces is one thing, but due to masking, due to, a lot of different various factors, most of the time when I'm seeing, facilitators in our referring network potentially like exhibiting the non-practice of self-care is usually when their customer service practices start to fall through, and their attention to detail, they're getting back to clients, maybe their screening practices start to falter a little bit. And so, I'm just trying to raise a level of tangibility here where, yes, it's good. Well, it's for the supervisor to be inquiring, but how does somebody actually demonstrate active self-care unless you're sitting on the mat with them or in an experience with them? So I just wanted to bring that into this conversation as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I very much appreciate that point. I mean, one thought I have is I'd like to leave some of that to the supervisor, trusting in, these supervisors are going to have some kind of license for themselves. And to your first point, in this 6-month consultation period, the way we have it set up, the facilitator the supervisor is liable for the facilitator's practice. So that's the way this is set up right now. I don't know that that'll stay that way, but that's the suggestion, if that makes sense. So you are signing off on this facilitator's hours as a supervisor. So in terms of if there were an ethical decision to be made, ultimately that would fall on the supervisor in this.
Okay, that's clear for me for that point. Yeah, thank you for that. And then I guess to be a little more specific on self-care, potentially there just may be a little bit more language on what a supervisor would do if an individual is not exhibiting self-care. So I think that we're talking about this in the positive lens, what routes does a supervisor have to take? Is there reporting? Are they then not in the eligible status to sit with clients? Is it, and I don't know how granular we get here, but I see that as a part that's missing in this thing, which is okay, they're going to demonstrate self-care. We should require what should happen if a person's not doing that, which would then, limit the care of the client.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think it's partly a decision, a clinical decision the supervisor has to make in that situation. You know, just like when I supervise students, I have to decide how I'm going to respond if they're not practicing in a way that I consider to be ethical. So we rely partly on the supervisor to do their due diligence here.
Yeah, thank you. I even think language like that, what you're saying, would be helpful in this section, but certainly yield to the voting participants on what to do here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Beachy?
Yeah, I might just want to suggest one phrase that could help clarify this a bit. Perhaps we want to add in both ethics and self-care, or in all of these sections that we're looking at right now, just that this will reinforce the training curriculum, because we really don't have to reinvent the wheel in a sense, because all of these competencies are already there in the training curriculum. So the point is just to reinforce that curriculum. And then to Jimmy's point, I think that it will be important to have some kind of assessment process, and I assume that the training centers would develop the assessment at the end to decide if someone is adequate to move on from their provisional status to being licensed. And then a final comment is just the liability issue. The liability question is a big question that the training centers will be concerned about as well, and that's just something that will probably need further attention.
Yeah, agreed on all those points. I like the idea of adding that piece about reinforcing educational training. So Sam, if we go up a little bit before all the list of different components. So at point H at the beginning, that the following competencies, and then parenthetical there after, so the supervisors must demonstrate via structured evaluation, and that the following competencies, parentheses, so in the middle of the sentence, we're going to add this. Yeah. Sorry, I think there's a little bit of a lag. So parenthetical after the phrase, the following competencies. Parentheses. Yeah, so you're going to erase that extra. You have the following competencies in there twice now. So parentheses, reinforcing competencies learned in the education program in parentheses. And then you just have to erase that extra. You have the following competencies in there twice. Thank you. Mr. Eshelman?
Thank you, Dr. Beachy and Jimmy. I think those points I really want to underscore a lot of those points. I have a couple of questions, I guess, coming back to the requirements of group or the consultation piece. How much is going to be done in group? How much is going to be done individual? It's kind of a general question. And then my curiosities are really going towards liability and what the supervisors are going to be liable for. I think we're putting out within the context of how much education, how much practicum facilitators are undergoing. Broadly speaking, I think we're putting a lot of pressure on supervisors here within this program, and in terms of a liability. So I have a serious curiosity and concern about how much liability we are. So more so, I guess my comments are putting out birds of curiosity, and would love to see where it goes.
For you. I mean, I think that is a true statement, that we're putting a lot of pressure on supervisors in this program. I guess what I would hold space for is that this is a standard in these kinds in professions, right? So if I agree to take on a student as a supervisor, I'm signing off on what they're doing, and I'm putting my license on the line when I'm doing that.
Yeah, I think that point's totally understood and well taken. And I think that just in my experience in this space, the minimum amount of hours that we're requiring for this program and the minimum amount of practicum that we're requiring for this program, I mean, it's just a different kind of beast that we're asking people to supervise than people who've gone through a 3-year mental health training program, who are then being supervised within, a therapeutic background. These are highly suggestible states under the influence of psychedelics, and it requires a level of skill. And so I understand that point's well taken, but I think that it feels overly burdensome, and I think we need to find a solution to how we're going to apply the liability, whether it's shared liability with the program and the supervisor. Because I think it's just a really important thing that we recognize the limitations of what the program is producing educationally, experientially, and realizing how much pressure and undue pressure, undue burden on the supervisor we're doing.
Thank you for that, Dr. Conner.
I don't know. I'm trying to orient my thoughts on this, but the idea, I think all of the points are really well made. I'm really stuck on this idea. The reason I put my hand up originally was our point that was made about now, which is to say that the ethical responsibility would be retained by the licensed individual. So if the facilitator's in consultation, the facilitator's licensed, then it would go to their license. If the facilitator is not licensed, then it would go to the supervisor's license. So I think Dr. Hanna made a good point on is standard practice. And I think, James, your points are really well made that this is different than a 3 or 5 year graduate program in mental health. And yet I think we would still have the responsibility reside with the licensed individual because that's the person providing care, rather than the center, which is going to have much larger responsibilities beyond just an individual participant.
Yeah, and I think the piece we're missing here is that provisional license that we built in, so that the facilitator at this point should have a training license. And so they do have a license they could lose. And also a training license requires supervision by someone else who's fully licensed in this model. So we do have a training. So at this point, the idea is the facilitator will have completed their didactics, their 40 hours of practicum. They now have a training license. And that means that they're still being supervised for 6 months. Dr. Vanderveen?
Sorry, can I kind of follow up on that? So the liability that the supervisor is responsible is for, what I'm hearing is limited to the amount, the content that is covered within the supervisory sessions alone. Is that right?
Yes, and part of their responsibility is doing their due diligence about signing off on the 6 month. Because what would happen if I as a supervisor I'm working with a facilitator and I don't feel like they're competent, then it's on me to say I'm not signing off on these hours, which means that facilitator then can't get a full license. Their training license expires and they can't go further.
Okay, thank you.
And this is a built-in safety mechanism in this training program, but it's similar to other training programs for different licenses. Dr.
Two kind of concrete questions. One is, if there's a provision for group supervision, how many people can be in each group? Is one question. The other one is, do we need a documentation requirement for the supervisors or not? Is that just up to them under their liability?
That second question is interesting. We do have a limit. So right now, 1.E, we have consultation may be provided in groups of up to 10 facilitators in training.
And
that was something we had discussed a while back. I mean, I think part of the main documentation is this, you're providing documentation to Dora saying this person met this requirement. But I don't know if someone from Dora can speak to whether we need to add that in as a requirement. Yeah.
Ashley or Lori, were you saying? I mean, documentation of the process is probably, we expect that, right? But what that process is, I don't know if it's like hard rules or if we say that's a best practice, right? For this process.
I mean, I'll just say that any supervisor meeting regularly with someone should be documenting, because if they do decide not to withhold their support and that person then turns around and sues them, they need to have documentation showing why they made that decision. Right. So that is a best. Yeah. I don't know. Dr. Connor, is this reflected in the ethical code at all?
I don't remember it. No, I don't think so.
I remember being in the ethical code. Okay. I don't think I thought about that. Yeah, I think it's something that is standard. Yeah, we do probably add it pretty quickly, but I don't think it's part of that.
Director Brad?
Yes, I do think that the documentation, requiring documentation could be beneficial if someone's signing off and submitting the hours. If there's an issue later on, then and the notes need to be requested or something, that they're available, that because they're required to document, could be really helpful in certain scenarios. So I do think it's a good idea.
So should we
Yeah, I think so. Like maybe an after point A, so it would be a new point B. And the way it works in other professions is both the supervisor and the supervisee are expected to keep documentation of hours.
I don't know if Ashley wants to.
Oh, Ashley, I'm sorry, I didn't see.
All good. I was just going to suggest that we add something in that leading group of A through I, like you've suggested with B here, that essentially makes the requirement for documentation, but does not explicitly spell out all of the perhaps detail of it. So I think supervisor, and I would actually put the burden on the supervisor, because they're going to be the ones who, at the end of the consultation period, are either going to sign off or are not. So I think they need to be the one that maintains the documentation. So I would just put in something like supervisors must maintain documentation contemporaneously within the consultation period to reflect compliance with the expectations or requirements of the period.
Thank you, Councilor Muller. Dr. Connor, was this what you want to speak about?
Yeah, I would just say that I think it's best that we suggest that it both track the hours minimally. The supervisors, and again, I'm speaking from my experience as both addiction counseling and a licensed psychologist. It's rare to put the burden up on the supervisor to track the hours, especially if you expect that the supervisor might be tracking multiple individuals. We might. It's not to say that we don't track the hours, but we're not required to track the hours. We're required to verify the hours, but the trainee is the one who's actually required to track the hours. And so I just don't want to create a system that's a significant deviation from what might be being done in other areas where these models are being used. So I would say at least requiring both, or putting the onus on the supervisee to track the hours with the onus on the supervisor to verify them.
It's that okay, Councilor Muller? Okay. So it would say supervisees must maintain contention, and then a new line in that same section. So supervisees instead of supervisors. Supervisors are required to verify documentation. Dr. Kester?
Oh wait, Ashley, can you? I think I missed something in the first line. Can you?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sorry to jump the line in front of Dr. Kester. What I might suggest is I hear Dr. Cunner's point loudly and clearly about the hours period. I'm not sure that the purpose of documentation is only for hours, and so the assessment of the areas that you guys have bulleted out later in this subheading 1, I would suggest that the supervisor probably needs to be the one who documents everything but the hours, just because I think that the self-care discussion that you just had, right? Like, I think it's incumbent on the supervisor to note, hey, we had a conversation about self-care activities and I was comfortable with the approach, right? Like, I don't want to tell them that they need to, exactly how they need to write that down, because I think different people have different styles. But at some point, a supervisor is going to have to sign off on this person or decline to. And if they're not keeping notes contemporaneously around kind of the areas of discussion, or the kind of how they are assessing their supervisee, then it will be hard for them to justify it at the end of the day. And I want to make sure that they essentially cover their back in case there's something wrong. I don't have any problem whatsoever with requiring supervisees to track hours or to track other things if you think that's appropriate. But I do think that there will be a qualitative assessment at the end of this period, and I want to make sure that if the supervisor is saying, no, you're not good, I won't sign off on you, I want to make sure that if someone has to justify that they've got something that they can reflect. And I certainly don't want that to be a post hoc kind of justification.
Quite well taken. So maybe, Sam, sorry, we say supervisors instead of must maintain documentation contemporaneously with the consultation period to reflect expectations of the period. New sentence after that. Supervisees, must maintain documentation of supervision hours. And then one more sentence, supervisors must verify documentation of supervision hours. That seem okay? Dr. Kester, I know you've been waiting a while.
No, thank you. Actually, and Ms. Muller summed up a lot of what I was thinking. And just let's say into some of the conversations there, because there's, I think, a couple pieces when we talk about this. But as a clinical supervisor, I don't feel like it's any undue burden to keep records. Matter of fact, I think it's best practices, because not only am I, and I don't know how it works in my professions, but when I have a student operating and I'm supervising them, they're operating under my license and underneath my liability. And the institution that I'm practicing at carries that insurance, but it's still, a policy that kind of carries down. So I feel like there's two things being addressed here, not only just like best practices for addressing like who can move forward in a program, but also a question that we probably can't answer, and that's how insurance is going to work with all of this, because those policies are forthcoming, I'm sure, and that's going to be a whole different question. When I hear this question of liability, I see two parts to it, but I don't think it's in any way inappropriate to ask a supervisor to keep records. And matter of fact, checking in with students, it's a nice, convenient way to do an ethical check-in as well. when you're looking at your records compared to your students' records, is you're going to be working closely with them. And I think also because of the nature of what is being developed with this particular licensure, having more documentation, having more information to draw from it, more data, frankly, will be useful, because this licensure, this facilitator licensure will certainly be iterative and will be evolving. And so as people move forward and graduate from programs, and we start to see which students and future facilitators are doing great and which ones are having problems, having these programs produce a little bit more data could be really instructive for any corrective actions or how things move forward. But otherwise, I don't really feel like it is an undue burden to ask just basic documentation from supervisors, because it's no different than what we do for patients, and these supervisors will be getting paid for their time. So it can just be built into the requirement of what they do in a day.
Thank you, Dr. Kester. I appreciate that. I know we have 2 more hands up. I just realized I was very remiss in not calling a break. If your comments, Dr. Chavez and Dr. Beachy, are short, we could definitely get to those first, but I would like to take a break. It's been a while. We've been going very hard here. So, Dr. Chavez?
I was going to go back to the self-care so we can take a break before. I just at what Dr. Kester was saying. I think he gave a really good description of how to move forward and how important the documentation is, because we're going to need a lot of documentation up front. It's just going to need that. And so I thought the way that he described it is a really good fit for what we're doing here. But my suggestion or my comments were around the self-care. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Chavez. Remind me, please. Dr. Beachy?
Briefly to close the loop perhaps on some of the conversation about supervision, I wonder, in some fields they're moving away from the language of supervision more toward training consultation, and I wonder if that would influence liability at all. It's just something to think about.
Thank you, Dr. Beachy. I appreciate that. All right, so I am going to have the board, we'll take a short break. Please ensure all cameras are turned off and everyone is muted during the break. The meeting will resume at 11:46 a.m. Great. I'm going to bring us back. Dr. Chavez, are you back? Are you to bring up your discussion point?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
What I wanted to share is that, we were talking about self-care and how we were discussing how we might ensure that people are practicing their self-care and what that would look like. And I would just like to give credit to Dr. Estes. She's not here today, but I'd like to give credit to her work because she has a conference that she holds. And I don't know if she still does it, but it's a week-long conference, and it's here in Colorado, and it's called The Wounded Healer. And what you do is, when you sign up to attend this conference, you're asked what kind of work you've done on yourself. Are you part of, have you experience or taken therapy in the past? Are you part of a women's group? Are you attending sweat lodges? What is it that you do to take care of yourself? Because the wounded healer, I think it was Dr. Vandermeer that talked about your shadow work, because your triggers and your life is going to come up when you're working with people. And what does that look like? So you're not projecting your own stuff. I mean, there's just so much involved in that self-care piece. So just maybe, I don't know, maybe a recommendation that people look at her work, because it's really important. The wounded healer is very important in how you're going to practice. And, you know, so you can be really transparent with your, we've talked about the word supervisor, and I don't know the other term that someone suggested, a training guide. But the point is really knowing and understanding the wounded healer and how that applies to your self-care practices, so that you can be the best for yourself and take care of yourself, and also be able to be of service to others. Anyway, that's what I wanted to suggest. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that suggestion, Dr. Chavez. Yes, I would definitely agree that any training program would want to look at Dr. Estes' work in this area for sure. So thank you for that. All right. Any other discussion on this piece in particular? I'm not hearing any. The next agenda item, I want to focus primarily on voting participants of the subcommittee, but also welcome any discussion from any non-voting participants. But the goal of this third agenda item is to make sure we've addressed everything else in these recommendations that we need to address in order to bring this to a vote, to bring these recommendations to the full board meeting tomorrow. So kind of last call on discussion about the recommendations for our subcommittee for that board meeting tomorrow. Ms. Moeller.
Thanks, and sorry, I can't apparently start my video. I'm trying, but the host has stopped it for me. Here we go. Oh, great. Anyway, sorry about that. In the spirit of additional recommendations to bring to the board tomorrow, Sam and I have been working on some language in the background here regarding creating paths for facilitation. And this is a diversion from what we've been talking about today, so bear with me. But maybe adding to the consolidated recommendations a new point 5, that the state should create a path for facilitation that take place in settings other than healing centers. So, for example, in personal residences, under certain conditions. I think we need to probably spend some time in a subcommittee working through those details, and so I'm not sure that it would be necessarily appropriate to fully flesh that out today, but at least get the recommendation in.
I think that's lovely. The other settings that come to mind, I know Dr. Hughes isn't here, but she's brought up in the past of, if a therapist wants to get licensed as a facilitator, but doesn't want to be like working in a healing center, but would like to occasionally offer a psilocybin session in their mental health clinic. Could that be an option outside of a healing center? But I know she's brought up that issue. Yes.
Yeah, and I actually want to mention and clarify this. So we have recommendations in emergency response safety and ethics on authorized locations other than a healing center. We've discussed at home, but I think for today's today being the last subcommittee meeting for qualifications, licensing, and training of the other subcommittees, if we have a recommendation here to clarify that the agencies should work on this, that allows us in rulemaking to work on this, as well as the board to continue working on this throughout the next year. And Dr. Connor has put an outline together, and Dr. Sicily has provided me an outline recently, and I think this is something that we need to tackle on the nuances, but having a recommendation regarding allowing for facilitation to take place at a participant's home under certain conditions related to the participant, and to create a pathway for facilitation to take place at an authorized location other than a healing center would be fantastic, and we won't have to have that discussion at the board meeting.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the ask today is just that we as a subcommittee recommend that we feel that DORA and DOR should work on this pathway.
Yeah, and I have written language, but I want to also give Sue
Dr. Sisley.
Yeah, sure. I vigorously endorse this. As Sam mentioned, I sent him some language recently to see if we could really kind of crystallize our thoughts on this. And I know it's last minute, so it may not be able to get into this first round of Rex. But if we make a concerted effort, soon after to really dive into this piece, because to me, I'm a palliative care doc. I do most of my work in the patient's homes, and so I feel like I have a very enthusiastic desire to see this through. So so that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Sisley, and thanks for your work on this area. I also enthusiastically endorse this. I think it's an important piece, so thank you. Bye. Dr. Vanderveer.
I agree. I totally support it. I just want to offer that I was recently reviewing some VA regulations on the dose administration of ketamine outside of the location where the DEA license is held, and there's a black bag phrase in how you can work with Schedule 3 substances. It might be relevant. It might be useful to look at in drafting that.
I think for today's I want to see it first, and I think we can use it for the next phase, that part of that discussion, because I think it's one of our priority items, along with many others that we have to work on in 2024, regarding like the nuances in there. But if you could send that over to me, that will help us when we meet back up to discuss that, and wait, also any written feedback for us or any comments that you want to provide in this process, even at the stakeholder meetings or in rulemaking, if we touch on these subjects, would be fantastic. But before that, would also welcome any recommendations in this policy area that we can provide to the board to be reviewing before we meet up and discuss that. The written language that I have right now that I think works is the state, DORA and DOR should promulgate rules to create a path for facilitation to take place at a participant's home under certain conditions, including but not limited to needs related to palliative care, end of life, hospice, disability. I think I should add mobility, etc., related to the participant, and create a path for facilitation to take place at an authorized location other than healing centers. And I've added that in the consolidated recommendations at the bottom of the section that we just reviewed. So I don't know if Amanda, if you want to pull that document up on the screen so people can see it.
Which one, Sam?
The consolidated recommendations document that we had in the Google Docs. Yep. So if you scroll down a good bit. Wait. Go back up, just that last page right there. And I always add an extra seat because I'm an idiot. So, apologies. But this is...
I think this looks good. Do we want to include some examples of what an authorized location other than healing centers might be? I think it's in the emergency safety and ethics subcommittee materials, but...
I don't think it's necessary at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in agreement with this. Is any other discussion about this? Any concerns? All right, thank you for drafting that. Oh, yes, Skippy.
Yeah, I fully endorse this as well. I'm just reading through it. This may not be the right place for this. I had a note that for tomorrow that was in a different subcommittee's work, but it related to the premises. And I wasn't thinking it went here, but hearing us talk about this, maybe it does. So I think we need to have a recommendation somewhere in the consolidated recommendations that talks about zoning. And so I don't know if this is a place we should do that. Again, I had put it into a different subcommittee, but I just thought I would raise it since we're talking about locations. And I can explain why that's important, but
Yeah, can you elaborate on what you're conceptualizing?
yeah. So conceptually, like the draft language that I had for the recommendation would be a healing center and/or licensed premises should be treated as medical clinics, health clinics, and service uses for the purposes of zoning, and home use should be, and this is where the link was, and home use should be dictated by existing local zoning regulations around home commercial use. The reason that you want to include that is when all this stuff lands, it's going to land in municipalities, towns of different sizes. And without guiding language, everybody's zoning department is going to look at that and go, we have no idea what to do with this, which is going to kick off thousands of hearings across the state that are going to take a very long time and confuse a lot of people unnecessarily. And all we need to do is just provide that simple guidance of this should be treated like this. And it also clears up the home care piece where individual communities are going to have their own rules on what is or isn't allowable commercially. And so it honors those local rules, but this takes it from multiple public hearings in every community in the state to a simple, oh, there's a line and we're done. It's just an administrative function. There, done. Okay.
Yeah. Councilor Mueller?
Thanks. I think that's an interesting concept. And I'm wrestling internally with the concept of how we kind of embrace those concepts, right? Obviously, neither this board nor Dora can impact local zoning, and they can't change that. But maybe there is an area of opportunity to put something in recommendation that the rules be that the rules include some sort of definition or description, probably, frankly, from revenue's perspective, not Dora's perspective, that licensed facilities should be treated as a healthcare, like other healthcare entities.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because you can't override the local, but you could make the recommendation that it's treated like, and again, this is just the recommendation is like medical health clinic or service uses, and then all know that you're defaulting to local zoning around commercial use of residential space.
Yeah. And they're going to do what they're going to do with it, right, at a local level. But at least our rules could make a recommendation, or at least Dora's rules could make Dora's rules could make a recommendation that they be treated similarly.
That's right. And again, they can do whatever they want, and they will, but it takes it from a condition of everyone has to start in square one with this totally unknown thing to there's a clear administrative path, and if they want to do something else, they may.
Authorized locations and healing centers, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I wrote it as sort of a healing center and/or licensed premises, just because that mirrors the language.
The language of this document.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Sam, it might, if the subcommittee is interested in doing that, it might be worth making this a separate recommendation, just right below where we started, and essentially, just state something like, we recommend, and the state should adopt rules, should promulgate rules to articulate consistent application or to encourage consistent application of local zoning laws with those applicable to healthcare facilities.
Okay. My only healthcare facilities or service uses.
I think I think there has to be something in there about authorized locations and healing centers, right? That the state should promulgate rules for authorized location for healing centers and authorized locations other than healing centers.
Healing centers and licensed and or licensed premises, as the way it's written in statute, to be treated in local zoning outlets. After premises to be treated as,
No, I think the rest is good.
to encourage consistent application of local zoning laws with those applicable to healthcare facilities or other service uses. Yeah. And this is the separate tying in piece that maybe goes above, but that home use should be dictated by existing local zoning regulations. Which basically just says if they allow for commercial uses in residential, great, and if they don't, and this doesn't get special permission, it just follows the local laws. And those will be district by district, they'll be different in different parts of the community. I wonder if we want to make, if we have any other discussions on the current topics, and let us wordsmith this last portion, and then we can make that as the final recommendations to cover these two first. And then we get to that.
Yeah, that sounds good. Dr. Cicely?
Yeah, I wanted to just come back to, first of all, I just got to say thank you, Skippy, for bringing that back up, because I remember you raising this early in the year at the very start of our deliberations. I'm really happy that's back on the table because it's crucial. Is there a way we could add a date to the discussion about the home settings regs? I'm just hoping we could establish, or just to verify that we're going to be able to get that done by the time the program starts. I just hate to see it be rendered like a lower priority and not be done by next year.
Councilor Muller or Sam, do you have thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, I was wordsmithing the recommendation, so I apologize, Dr. Cicely.
No worries. Dr. Cicely is asking for a date on that recommendation about being able to facilitate in homes so that it happens at the same time the program rolls out.
I think the idea for all of these recommendations is that we have rules largely built out before we start accepting applications for licensure, December 31, 2024. So I think the expectation and the intention is for all of these to start getting it to get addressed in perhaps the next round of conversation. And the next set of rulemaking, which would occur before that date. So I'm not sure that we necessarily need to actually tag a deadline on it. If you want to put a deadline on it, I'd recommend something more. I wouldn't put an actual date to it. I would just say before the program, before licenses are issued, or something like that.
Are you okay with adding that?
Great. Yes, sure.
Okay. So I think maybe for this is for the recommendation before the last one, just adding a clause at the very beginning that says recommendation colon before licenses are issued, the state door. Yeah.
I'm just concerned about this portion right here. I feel like since we haven't filed a rulemaking notice just yet, I'm worried about the language on before licenses are issued, because if it's before December 31st, 2024, if that's sooner, I think that can be a challenge, but I don't know. Can you explain that more clearly, Sam? I feel like, if state rulemakings happen to implement that we follow APA on implementation requirements, that's 120 days that we need after rulemaking for implementation. Do we have enough time to develop that, or if the agencies develop? But is the concern that there are kind of required time frame limitations in that process, and you're concerned that it could put the other stuff we want to happen earlier if we're ready earlier, or just that we're setting an unreasonable expectation, or both? I think maybe the language should be with the hope that this is implemented before licenses are issued, or something, because I feel like we need to have the meetings on this specific topic from the board as well, and then taking into consideration the rulemaking and the stakeholder meetings that both agencies are doing.
I'm gonna jump into. The thing would be that before licenses are issued and that recommendation gets accepted, then it could slow down the entire process, right? Because if we don't finish this, I think this is what Sam might be saying as well, but if we don't finish the language of these areas, would it prevent anyone from getting a facilitator license the way that this is written, which is something we don't want to do, right? If we're going to roll out in stages, would you prefer that we roll out facilitator licenses for healing centers and for other places, but while we continue to work on rules that might be specific to specific locations, or do we want not a license any facilitator until all of the rules have been fully developed, which I think by putting that tag in here might be what we're suggesting, which would be not, I would recommend.
Ms. Robinette, did you have thoughts on this issue?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to jump in. I agree with Sam that before licenses are issued, language does concern me for the same reasons that he and Dr. Connor just flagged, that this, this could certainly mean that you all aren't expecting that we don't issue any licenses until we have established these rules to allow natural medicine services at authorized locations other than healing centers. The other piece I wanted to highlight that's tied to what Sam was suggesting is for Department of Revenue, our required mandatory rulemaking is around establishing standards for healing centers as well as a whole host of other things. It's permissive rulemaking authority for authorized locations other than a healing center. And so how we've, I think, been clear in our approach is that we want to focus on those mandatory rulemaking items first. And this might just be a little bit out of step with that.
And Councilmember Miller, I see your hand went down. Did that cover what you were going to say?
Thanks. Yes and no. I was going to perhaps suggest that instead of using the language before licenses are issued as a prefatory clause, maybe we could add a sentence at the end that the board recommends that rules be considered on this topic at the state's earliest opportunity. Perhaps that is it conveys the board's urgency, but recognizes the reality of the situation, but does not bind the agencies.
Dr. Cicely?
Yeah, no, I can agree with Ms. Muller's language. I definitely don't want to impede the launch of the whole program for this, but I just want to make sure that it's identified as a real priority and not just something that can be ignored. So okay, that's great. Yeah, if we can use Ms. Muller's language.
Is that okay, Sam? So taking out for licenses are issued, but adding that additional sentence that we recommend.
Yeah, give me 1 second. So on the first one, that we...
Yeah, so a sentence at the end. We recommend that. Is it DOR, Cassim?
Sorry, I sent the language to Sam. The board recommends that rules be considered at the state's earliest opportunity.
Is adding a seat. Yeah, and the original intention for including this last recommendation was to make sure that it was prioritized, like Dr. Sisley mentioned. So I think this does a solid job with that. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Dr. Sisley, your hand's still up. Are you good? Thank you. All right. Any other discussion before we move to this big vote? All right, so going into this, I just want to thank everyone once again for all their tremendously hard work on these recommendations with the subcommittee, and kind of echoing what Skippy said, are really I'm very proud of these recommendations and the work we've done together up to this point. I want to remind you as we're going into this vote, both for our subcommittee members, but also non-voting participants and the attendees, that this is not the end. These recommendations are going to be submitted tomorrow to the full board for a vote, and then from there submitted to DORA and the Department of Revenue, and they'll go through their rulemaking for further modifications, including public comment and feedback prior to implementation. So with that said, I'm going to ask the voting subcommittee members for a motion to approve the recommendations, including all the changes we made today.
I'll make the motion. Oh,
So seconded.
So we have Dr. Sisley moved and Skippy, and thank you so much. Any discussion of this motion? All in favor? Please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion passes. Thank you again, everyone. I sincerely appreciate it. All right. So the next full board advisory meeting is tomorrow, Friday, the 19th of January. At that meeting, we're going to be discussing future meetings of this particular subcommittee. So we're not going to announce a future meeting yet until after that discussion. And with that, we'll move to ending our meeting today. So I'd like to thank everyone for your attendance and participation during today's meeting. Before we adjourn, there are a few items to be addressed. So like I said, the next meeting, the full board meeting, will be held on January 19th, 2024 at 1 p.m. Please remember, for those board members, that your attendance is necessary to ensure a quorum for that very important meeting to move all these recommendations forward. We're going to move through attestations. So do you attest and affirm that all conflicts of interest have been disclosed and that confidentiality of all board matters has been maintained since the previous board meeting? And I do attest. Lundy is absent. Dr. Clarissa Pincola Estes is absent. Dr. Sue Sisley?
I attest.
Thank you. Dr. Sophia Chavez? I attest. Thank you. Stacy Lux is absent. Skippy up to Mesro.
I do attest.
Thank you. And Dr. Brad Connor.
Retest.
Thank you so much. And I'll ask for a motion to end the meeting today to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Connor. Do we have a second?
A second.
Thank you, Dr. Sicily. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion passes. Thank you again, everyone. We'll see everyone tomorrow, and thank you again for all your hard work.
I think you're closet.
Amazing work. Such an honor to be part of this.
Agreed. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Leave.